Jim Varner. I will be guiding you step by step through the basic procedures of body repair and painting. You will learn how to repair rust holes, surface rust, dents, scratches, and basic painting touch-up. I am sure that you will find the information on this tape very useful. Now I would like to show you the tools and products you will be using to make your car or truck look like new again. This is a grinder. It's air operated. Has a 5-inch grinding wheel on it, 24 grit sandpaper. Well, actually it's a grinding disc, 24 grit grinding disc. You'll use the grinder. The basic use of the grinder is to grind around the repair area that you're going to repair, taking the paint off down to bare metal. You have to, when you make your repair, when you do your grinding, you have to grind the paint off because the plastic, the body filler you'll be using, will not adhere to paint. This is a DA, or an orbital sander. The basic use of this is for feather edging. You can take out little scratches, nicks, chips in the paint, and get it prepared for primer. This is a board sander. A board sander is used in making large, flat repairs. It uses a 36 grit or an 80 grit board paper. We'll get into that a little later. The body hammer, which is a little different than your household hammer, has a large, round, flat head on one side and a pick on the other. The flat head is for when you're working with the body metal to flatten it, get your ripples out. The point is after you're making your repair and you're in the Bondo procedure, and if you have a high spot, you can tap the high spot down with the pick end of the hammer. Body file, or what we call a cheese grater, a very essential tool, may I add. You use this after you've put your plastic on for your repair. You take the file after the plastic is set up but not hardened. You can file your area, which makes a lot less sanding in the end. You'll see how this works. Excuse me. This is a rubber block. It's a 5-inch hand sanding block. This also takes the same paper as the board by tearing the board paper in half. You can install the paper on the plastic rubber hand block. You'll see how this works. You got your blow off, which is air operated. Blow your dust away. Might add that this is very dusty business, so you want to get yourself a paper mask, or what we call a particle mask, and you can put this on and it will conform to your nose. Therefore you won't be breathing in the chemical aftermath of the body plastic. Or you have metal tape. This is a thick aluminum tape, sticky on one side. You can use this in repairing holes, which we have done in this tape. Okay, we'll get into a little bit of the product line now here. This is spot putty. This is used after you've made your repair and you've done your hand blocking, your sanding, you've primed the part, and any little nick, scratch, or imperfection that's in the plastic, after it's in primer, you'll use this on. And basically what this is a thick primer. You'll put this on and fill your scratches and nicks. You got masking tape. Now the tape is important for when you're in the painting stage. You can plan on spending about $2 a roll for masking tape. Now there's many tapes out there, but you will want to go with the more expensive tape. Have your Bondo spreaders, and this is just a board to put your plastic on, a mixing board. You can use a piece of cardboard. This is a piece of fiberglass, as you can see. Bondo spreaders come in many different sizes. This is my favorite here, but you can buy these in packs of 3. 3 different sizes, different ranges. This is the body filler itself. Now, as with all products that you can buy to use to repair your car with, there are many different products. Now this is a lightweight body filler. I prefer the lightweight body filler. It gives you an easier sanding time. less pits, it's less aerated. It also comes with a hardener. It's a two-part system. You have to use the hardener with the plastic or the plastic will not harden. Now we'll talk a little bit here about sandpaper. This is a grinding wheel that I showed you a few minutes ago on the grinder. This is a 24 grit aluminum oxide resin pad. And your board sandpaper comes in 80 and 36. Also comes in other sizes. We won't go into that. Then you have production paper. This is what you'll use for your finish work in your primer and when you are sanding your spot putty. And what I like to do is tear the sheet into halves, fold the sheet into thirds, makes the paper much easier to use, and as you use it then you can flip the paper, turn it. Now these are DA or orbital sander sanding paper. As you can see, it's got a self-stick backing on it, and it sticks itself to the back of the orbital sander. And this is what I call, this is something I've made up, this is what I use in my finish work before I'm ready to paint. This will check my body work or your body work to make sure that it's flat, it's straight, there's no ripples in it. And all this is, what it consists of, is about 6-7 sheets of the 180 grit paper. You'll be using 180, 320, 220 paper, the 80 and 36 board paper, and 24 grit grinding disc. And what I like about this is you can just take a little piece of veneer or very hard, stiff cardboard and cut it so that you can fold this paper evenly over 3 times and kind of use this as a block, a check sander. Now everything I've showed you here and what we've talked about, you'll see all of this used in the video. Most of the air tools here that I have are what a normal everyday body shop or body person would use to perform auto body repair. It's not necessary that you have these tools. What you need, you can use a drill and get a grinding attachment for the drill to make your grinds, and everything else you can do pretty much by hand with the hand block and by hand sanding. And most of the repair work that was done in this video is all done by hand. Well, I guess that about wraps this up here, so let's go on to the body work. The holes in this deck lid. As you can see, it has holes that go all the way across the bottom of the lid. Now the first step is to grind the paint off and expose the bare metal surface. Make sure that you grind all the paint off around the repair area, not leaving any paint, because the plastic that you are going to use will not stick to paint. Now when you're grinding this, make sure that you grind at least 1 inch to 2 inches away from the work that you are going to do. This way that you'll have plenty of room for your feather edge sanding, and you won't have to worry about the Bondo not sticking to the metal surface.
As you can see, the metal has been cleaned back. The paint has been ground off of the metal approximately 1 inch to 2 inches away from the repair area. Now in this scene, what we are going to do is take the body hammer and use the pick end of the hammer to tap down the rust holes and the immediate metal around the rust hole. By tapping the metal down around the hole, what you're doing is you're giving it a crater effect. Make sure that you get all of the holes tapped down, that you don't miss any. If you don't tap the hole down and you fill it with the plastic body filler, you'll get a bleed through after it's painted. In other words, what I'm saying is that it won't hold up. It will rust. The rust will come back through within a matter of a few days. Always make sure that you tap the metal down. At least tap the metal in 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch, and go around the hole, indenting the metal around the hole at least 1/8 of an inch. I might add that we eliminated the sound, the noise on this, because some of the air tools that you're going to hear running, and of course the hammer banging, it is quite noisy. It can get quite aggravating. Now this is what it should look like here after you have hammered the holes down with the pick end of the body hammer. As you can see, the hole itself is indented and the surrounding metal around the hole is also indented, approximately 1/8 of an inch. Now there's many ways you can repair these holes. If you are more advanced, you could weld these holes by brazing them, or you could cut a piece of metal and weld a new piece of metal over the holes. Alright, now we're going to apply the body plastic. Now when you put the plastic on with the applicator, push the plastic into the hole. This will seal the hole. Now you might want to put paper underneath the work area you're working on so that the plastic that you're putting on won't drip down and get on the surface below your work area. Once this plastic hardens, it's very hard to get off. Now what you want to do after you've pushed the plastic into the hole is you want to try to build the plastic up about 1/8 of an inch higher than the original metal. Now this doesn't have to be pretty because you're going to be grinding it off anyway. Now the plastic usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes to cure, depending on the temperature and the humidity. Now that the plastic is hardened, you can take the grinder and grind the plastic smooth. And therefore, again, you don't have to be perfect. This is not your finish work. This is just a basic, this is the beginning of repair. Use the flat edge of the grinder and take your time. Like I say, you can't hurt this. If you take it down too much, you're going to be filling it again anyway, so don't worry about what it looks like at this point. This is not the finished product. You can still see the area around the plastic where it was ground initially to clean the paint off. Now, it's very important that you keep the area around when you're putting on plastic to make sure that the plastic that you sanded, all the dust particles from the plastic is removed. If there are any pits or holes in the plastic that you put on, it will fill with dust and the Bondo won't stick. It eventually sink in. So you want to make sure that you blow the area off, wipe the area off very good. Also, when you're mixing your plastic, you want to make sure that you mix it very thoroughly. You want to make it all one color consistency. If you don't, when you spread your plastic on and it's not mixed thoroughly, you'll get a hard spot and then a wet spot of unhardened plastic because it wasn't mixed thoroughly. Then you'll have to dig all of that out and start over. Now on this coat of plastic here, you want to take a little bit more time, apply a lot of pressure to the top part of the applicator. That will give you a smooth edge between your body filler and your painted surface and make it a lot easier when it comes to the time for your sanding and your primering. If you note the way that I hold the applicator when I'm putting the plastic on, you'll see that it's almost even with the trunk lid, and I pull the applicator across the trunk lid to get the plastic to lay out nice and smooth. Now we'll let that plastic there harden up, and we'll be back. Now we're going to sand the area with the hand block, the 5-inch rubber hand block. I might add that all of these, like the rubber block, the cheese grater that we talked about in the beginning of the video, everything is available at your local auto parts store that carry paint and automotive body repair supplies. Also, you can find these things at your major discount stores. Now what you want to do is you want to use the flat side of the block. Let the block do the work. We're using a 36 grit board paper on the block at this time, which is a fast cut. You can see the dust falling down off the trunk lid, so it does cut very fast. It's a lot of arm work, and you'll switch arms quite a bit like I do there. Of course, there are power tools. The board sander could be used on this trunk lid, which would make work a lot easier, but for a lot of you viewers that can't afford to buy the tools, this is the best way to do it, and then you'll still save yourself a lot of money in the long run. Now the basic idea here is when you're sanding this is to make it form back to the original form that it was before. Bodywork is actually pretty easy to do. It's basically a how do I want to say? It's a common sense project. Alright, now that we've used the 36 on the 5-inch block, we're going to switch now to an 80 grit. Now remember that the board sandpaper is the same paper you'll use on the hand block. Now they also have available a 13-inch hand block which takes place of the board sander. And the hand block and the 13-inch hand block are very inexpensive. Now the purpose of the 80 is to get the 36 scratches. The 36, as you'll see when you use the 36 grit, is a very rough feeling, gritty sandpaper. Basically what you'll be doing is you'll be moving up in grades of sandpaper from start to finish, working with the 36 grit, the 80 grit, then onto a 220 grit, then into your primer, then to a 320, 180, now make sure that your edges are clean, and you can feel this as you go. You can feel ripples, low spots, and if it's necessary, you can refill just the area that you need to refill with plastic. You don't have to recoat the whole trunk lid just to get one spot that may be low refilled. Now we're using the orbital sander, the DA. This has a 220 grit sandpaper on the DA, and we're feather edging the area around the plastic repair. As you can see by the different colors, you can see the bare metal, then like a chocolate gray on film, and then the paint itself. Now this will feather edge to a very smooth surface. You won't even be able to feel where that breaks. Now if you don't have a DA, you can use the 80 on the block and feather with the 80 on the block, then use a 220 production paper on the block to do your feather edge, or you can also buy a 220 grade in a wet sand paper and wet sand the area in with the hand block. Now remember, you have to keep the area clean, and this is ready for primer here. Your repair is finished and you're ready to go into primer. Now what we want to do now is we want to mask off the trunk lid where you're going to be primering. You only need primer in the area you are working. You do not have to primer the whole trunk lid just to make this repair. When this gets painted, what we're going to do is we're going to spot in the repair. We're going to make a paint spot repair. Now you can take newspaper for masking, any type of paper. We prefer the newspaper. Fold the newspaper up so you have like a 2-inch to 3-inch fold. Apply tape to half of the paper and leave the other half off, and then you can use that for your masking to cover up so you don't get primer. And we're going to mask off the trunk lock here. Now take care when you're masking around trunk locks, moldings, door handles to make sure that the masking tape that you are using does not touch a painted surface. Make sure that the masking tape is only on the metal surface that you are masking. Now you can buy your primer in aerosol spray cans if you don't have air available to you and a spray gun. Now this is a lacquer base primer. You don't want to use enamel primer. You can buy the lacquer base primer in aerosol cans and get the same finish here. You'll get the same job done with an aerosol can as you will with the paint gun in your primer stage. Now that looks a lot different than it did in the beginning of the video, and we've got no more holes. We're ready to go into the finish work of the trunk lid. Try to build the primer up a little bit. Put 3 or 4 or 5 good coats of primer on your repair area. The more primer, the less little sand scratches and nicks you're going to have to fill with the spot putty. Primer usually takes 15 to 20 minutes to dry also. Now that the primer is dried, we're going to use the large hand block. And like I say, you can take a piece of veneer or hard cardboard, cut it to size so that your sandpaper, you can wrap your sandpaper around it and get 3 folds. Now when sanding with this, it covers a large area, which is really what you want to do. At the same time you're sanding down the thicker primer, you're also blocking in your work, making sure you don't have any high spots. Now if there was a high spot in this work, you'll see the Bondo come back through the primer. When you sand with this block, crisscross your work. You'll get a faster cut. Now this is a 150 production grade of sandpaper on the sanding block at this time. Use a full sheet to wrap around this block. You don't have to tear this paper in half. Sand until you can see that the consistency of the primer is a nice smooth. You won't have any rough spots in the primer. You want to make sure that this is smooth. Now after this is sanded, you will reprime it again. And once again, blow the sanded primer away from the work, making sure that it's nice and clean, no dust on the repair area that you're going to reprime. Now this time you won't put the primer on as heavy as you did the first time. You want to just kind of go over it, put a couple of light coats over the sanded area. Now you want to let that set and dry up, usually about 15 to 20 minutes. As you can see, it looks all very smooth. You don't see your plastic work, your body work. You have to make sure that you cover all bare metal in the Bondo with primer. And now what we're going to do here is we're going to check the work area for little nicks, scratches, or imperfections. I'm going to use the spot putty. And you can put this on with a small plastic applicator. And when you put this on, you don't want to glob it on thick. This is a thin repair material. You want to put it on thin. Actually, what this is a very thick primer. You can see I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on that, and you can see through the red through the primer. You want to put it on so it's translucent. You don't want to glob this on. This, if you put it on heavy, it will seem like it'll take forever to dry. Now this can also shrink and swell. You don't want it on heavy. You want it on thin. As you can see, it dries pretty fast in a thin stage. Now we'll let this set a few minutes and we'll be back. Now that the spot putty is dried thoroughly, we're going to take the 180 on the hand block again. As you can see, that sand's very easy. It comes right off. You don't have to put a lot of work into this. You want to make sure when you're sanding that after you're done sanding it, it is smooth and conforms to all the other work on the trunk lid. Making sure you get it off the lower edge. Now when you feel that, it should be smooth as glass. I'm going to blow the dust off from the working area one more time. Reprime the area. Lightly, I might add. You don't want to put your primer on heavy. And there you have it. You just repaired your first rust hole in a trunk lid. That's done. That's ready for paint. You let that dry, and with the exception of the finish sand, that's done. That is ready for paint. Now in this scene here, we're going to repair a rust hole. For demonstration purposes, we've taken a fender and burnt a hole in the fender to simulate a rust hole. Now, like you did in the first section there on the trunk lid, you want to make sure that you grind the area around the rusted area, cleaning all the paint off. As you can see, that is shiny metal there. There's no paint left on the area around the repair. And like before on the trunk lid, now we want to tap that hole down. We want to leave a working area there. You have to tap the hole in the fender down. Now there are many ways to repair this. You can use You could weld a little patch in there. You could pop rivet a patch in there, or you can use the metal tape. And for this demonstration, we are going to use the metal tape. Now you use the body hammer again. You want to tap around the rusted area to make your rusted area lower than the rest of the fender. You want to tap this down so it's at least 1/8 of an inch lower than the metal that is around the area that you're going to repair. As you can see, it's about 1/4 of an inch away from the hole that has been indented down. Now we'll take a piece of metal tape, the aluminum tape that I showed you in the beginning of the video, and you want to tear this tape so that the tape is about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch wider than the hole itself. This tape is very easy to tear, very easy to apply. It's adhesive on one side. And you'll see here shortly how it's applied. Now all you have to do is run your finger around the repair tape, making sure that it's stuck down in. There are no edges sticking up, no air pockets under the tape around the edges. And now the area is ready to be filled. You have a base there so your plastic will adhere. Now, like on the trunk lid, you want to put the plastic on the repair area, and like I say, it doesn't have to look pretty. You want to put it on thick over the area. You're going to have to grind it off or use the file, the cheese grater. Now I know when you repair, your fender won't be off the car, so what you want to do is maybe use some masking tape or duct tape and put it around the good area on, like, say, the door or the rocker panel, so that you don't get the plastic on a good panel. Now that the plastic is hardened, you can use the body file or cheese grater, which I prefer to call it. And as you can see, it grades off fairly easy. Now I have let this set up a little too long actually to use the cheese grater on it. This is actually in a dry stage. This is hardened plastic. So to save a little bit of time and some elbow grease, we're going to use the grinder and we're going to grind it smooth. Use a flat edge of the grinder You can feel with your hands and see if there's any high. Now when I felt that, it was still high, so we want to grind some more off. Now there are no high spots there, and we're ready to reapply a second coat of plastic. And what once was a rust hole is now starting to take shape. Now in applying the second coat of plastic, you don't want to build it up as thick as you did the first time. This time you'll pretty much be able to get it on and get it to the shape of the contour of the fender, feathering the plastic in with the spreader on the top on the painted surface. Now we'll let that set up and come back to that in a few minutes. Now during the break there, I used the cheese grater on it before it hardened all the way, and that's why it looks like it does now. Now once again, this is the 36 block, 36 grit sandpaper on the hand block. You want to use the flat of the block. Let the block be your guide. Now a rust hole like that, if you was take it to a body shop and have it repaired, you're looking at around $125. You can probably do this repair at home for a cost of, with a spray can of paint to touch up, which is available at any of your automotive supply stores that carry paint. You can do this here for a total cost of about $20. So you've saved yourself, in essence, $100 by repairing this rust hole yourself. Now after you've used the 36 paper, you'll go with the 80 grit again. This feather edges the plastic, takes the roughness out of the plastic from the 36 grit, and this gets you into ready to go into your primer stage. And again, if you don't have an orbital sander, you can feather edge the painted area there with the 80 and then go over it again by hand with some 220 grit wet or dry sandpaper. If you elect to wet sand that, the water will not hurt the plastic, but make sure that the area in the plastic is dry before you prime it. Now when you feel that, you won't be able to feel anything. I mean, it should be nice and smooth with no ridges or lips in the Bondo or on the painted surface that you feather edged in. Now this is done and this is ready for primer. And there again, when you primer, you want to build your primer up heavy. Put at least 3 or 4, 5 coats of primer on top. And there you have a finished product. Now this is ready to go into the final steps of refinishing with a hand block, then your spot putty, and finish sand. but your major and your hard repair is finished. And now in this scene here, we're going to remove scratches. There's some scratches there, some nicks, some chips in the paint. As long as there's no dents where the scratches are, you don't have to do any body filling whatsoever. You can use a 220 on the DA, or you can hand sand this with the block and 220 wet sand or dry sand. And all you have to do here, these are the easiest repairs there are in the body business. Just feather edge the repair area out with the 220, prime it, and it's ready for finished sand and paint. As you can see there, you see the different colors. You see the bare metal, the black, the gray, and then the paint are all in layers, and when you feel that, you won't be able to feel any lip or anything on that whatsoever. Now that repair there is ready for primer. You don't have to put on as much primer on this repair as you do on a Bondo repair, because there's nothing there that you're trying to fill with the primer itself. So you just want to spray a couple of light coats of primer on that. Let that dry, and you can finish sand that and paint it, which we will get into towards the end of the video. And now we're going to repair dents. Now when you get ready to do this, you want to grind the area around the dents, giving yourself, on this being a large flat surface, you want to give yourself at least 5 or 6 inches of extra working area. Therefore, grind 5 or 6 inches around the dented area. Now, if at all possible, when you repair a dent, if the dent is deep enough, if it's a deep dent, you want to try to pop out as much of the dent as you can. If you have to get in, take a door panel off and use a hammer, a body hammer, to pound out the dent, the idea is to get the dent, the metal in the dent, to conform as much to original as possible, therefore eliminating a lot of plastic in the dent. Now these dents here are about 1/8 of an inch deep, and there's 5 of them there. It's not anything serious. It's not going to take a lot of plastic to fill the dents, so therefore you don't have to tap those dents out. You want to blow your area off good. Metal shavings, paint, dust, so your plastic will adhere good to the metal. Apply your plastic to the dented area first. Put it on thick. Once you get used to working with the spreader, it'll become much easier for you to apply the body filler. And as before, you don't have to worry about the plastic getting on the painted surface, because by the time you're through with your work, you'll have all of your plastic back in the ground area and off the painted surface. But you want to put that on pretty thick. Usually after you apply the plastic to the area that has the dents, if you let it set for just a few seconds, it will sink into the dent and fill it. Then you can see where you have to add more plastic like I just did there. Now let that plastic set up. Now in this segment here we're using a cheese grater again. Use the flat edge of the cheese grater at all times. As you can see, this eliminates a lot of sanding and a lot of grinding. Actually, when you do this, when you get good enough, you can file this down almost perfect and ready for sanding. Stop and feel what you're doing as you go. Like I say, if you take off too much with a cheese grater, it's okay. You're going to put another coat of plastic on this anyway. Now this coat of plastic here will go on much thinner than the last coat, and after you've cheese grated that, when you felt that, it almost felt like it should be pretty much perfect. So now what you want to do is you want to put a thin coat of plastic on using the plastic applicator to form your repair like we did in previous repairs. Now if it's hot and humid outside, you usually don't have very much time to work with your plastic, but you can regulate the drying time of the plastic by the amount of hardener you do put in the plastic. Now we'll let this set and we'll be back. Now as you can see in this shot here, I did use the cheese grater just to take the top layer of the plastic off, because after the plastic dries it has a sticky film on top that gums up the sandpaper. Now for this repair, seeing as how it's a large repair on a flat surface, we've chosen to use the board sander and 36 grit sandpaper. Now like I say, you can buy a hand operated board sander at the auto parts store. They are inexpensive and you can do this all by hand. Feel your work as you go to make sure that you've not sanded too far or not sanded enough. Okay, now that we've used the 36, we're going to go back to the 5-inch hand block with 80 grit sandpaper and feather edge the Bondo, the plastic, into the body panel. Now you can use 80 grit to do this also on the hand board or a board sander. Now, like before, use the flat of the block, the face of the block, and let the block do the work. Keep it flat on the surface. Don't sand in one spot too long or you'll get a low spot. You want to try to sand equally over the whole area of your repair. Now that we've 80'd that with the hand block, we'll feather edge that with the DA. Now it looks like the DA is hitting the bondoed area, but it isn't. Try to stay away from the repair area as not to put a dip in your work. With practice, you'll get good at this and won't have a problem doing this. And for those of you that have to use the block with the 80 to block that in, it really won't make much of a difference because you're going to be doing it equally over the whole panel. Now that this has all been feather edged in, this is ready for primer. Now, because this is a repair area, you would like to build the primer up on this fairly thick, 5 to 6 coats. There again, blow the dust off of your repair area. After the primer is dry, you'll use the big hand block with the 180 grit to check your work. Then reprime. Spot putty, look for nicks and scratches. Use the spot putty. Let that dry. Sand the spot putty down with the 180 block. Reprime, and it's ready for finish. Now what we're repairing here is surface rust. Now these are not holes, this is surface rust. We're using a handheld sandblaster, which is air operated, very inexpensive. If you don't have a sandblaster, you can use a grinder to do this. It makes more work for you. You can also use a 220 sandpaper on the DA, or use your 80 grit on the hand block. Sandblasting is the recommended way, it's the better way. As you can see, the sand knocks all the rust out of the metal and leaves a nice, clean, shiny surface. You have to try to get the rust off as best as you possibly can. Even though it looks dry and it feels dry, the rust pits the metal, and inside those pits is moisture. And if all you do is just cover the moisture after you've sanded it, you're sealing the moisture inside, therefore it continues to eat the rust, and months or a year down the road you will have a hole there. So we do recommend sandblasting. Now you want to wear protective shielding on your face and your eyes if you are going to be sandblasting. Now after the sandblasting's done, what you want to do is you want to use the 220 on the DA and feather in the area around the sandblasting area. Feather edge this the same way, just like you did in your repair areas, so that after it is feather edged and you feel it, you have a very nice smooth finish. Now for areas like inside this door jamb here, it would probably be easier for you if you used the 180 hand sandpaper and did the door jamb by hand. A smooth surface there, and this is ready to be primed. You want to use a tire cover to cover up your tire there so you don't get overspray from the primer. You can use an old sheet, old rug, anything to save cleanup in the end. And as you can see there, we've masked off the edges of the moldings because it has to be primered inside the wheel well, and it saves a lot of cleanup later. There again, you want to blow your dust away from your working area where you are working. Apply 2 or 3 good coats of primer. Make sure you get your penetration in where your surface rust was at. You want to try to cover all of your areas real good with primer. You don't want any bare metal showing whatsoever. You can't paint over top of bare metal. Now after this is primed here, this is going to be a spot-in paint repair. We're not going to paint the whole side of the car. We're just going to spot the paint in, which is very easy to do, very easy to prepare. Now after the primer dries, you'll want to go over your work and check for any little pits and scratches. Alright, what we're going to do now is we're going to mask off the area in preparation for the painting. You want to mask, for just touch-up, you want to mask off at least 18 to 20 inches away from your work. When you spray the paint, it has a lot of overspray that will get on the other parts of the car. But if you do get a little bit of overspray in a place where you don't want it, don't worry. You can clean it off. You can use lacquer thinner and wipe it off, or you can use rubbing compound, which we will use here shortly to prepare this surface for paint. As you can see, we covered the molding there and the mud flap with paper. Now you want to mask off your molding completely. Be careful not to get the tape on the painted surface. You only want to mask the molding. You want to make sure that you cover the molding completely so that no molding is showing through the masking tape. And remember what I said about the paper. Fold over the newspaper and then apply the masking tape to the newspaper. Paint will seep through the newspaper. You can see how we masked off the rocker molding there. This will prevent overspray from getting on the rocker molding or inside the door there on the carpet or the door rubber. As you can see, for this repair we didn't have to do a whole lot of masking. We are only going to paint the edge of the door sill, the lower front quarter, and the lip around the wheel. Now that we're all masked off and ready, we're going to check for nicks and imperfections. And remember, do not apply the spot putty thick. You only need a thin skim coat. You can still see through that. It's a translucent color. You can still see the primer behind the spot putty. Let the spot putty dry. As you can see, the rest of the work there didn't need any type of spot putty at all. Usually when you sandblast and DA, it comes out pretty smooth. You don't have to use the spot putty. Now we're using a 150 production paper and we are folding it into thirds. This way you can you get to use all of your sandpaper. There's no waste. You don't have to use a sanding block or the hand block on this area. It's a small area. Use the flat of your fingers with the sandpaper to sand that area smooth. Now you will see that the spot putty is only in the area where it needed to be filled, to fill the little imperfections in the body panel. Now you want to reprime the area. Do not paint over the spot putty. Always prime the spot putty. The spot putty will bleed through the paint. A couple of light coats is all you need. Alright, now we're ready to do the finish sand. This panel is almost ready to paint. Now this is a 320 production paper. This is the final stage of sanding before you're ready to paint. Now make sure that you sand the area smooth, and if by chance you happen to sand through and hit bare metal, just take your primer and lightly touch the spot that came through in bare metal and then lightly rescuff it with the 320. Now when you're sanding with the 320, you want to make sure that it's smooth when you're finished. You don't want to see any ripples or imperfection in the primer itself, because that will show in paint. When you're done sanding, that should feel as smooth as glass. Sand all the areas of primer. If you don't sand the primer, the paint will be rough looking and will not adhere. The primer has to be sanded or the paint will not adhere to it. It'll peel off. And after you do that and you feel it, like I say, it will feel like a sheet of glass. And now after the hand sanding is done, you're going to rub out the areas around the repaired area. And what you want to use is a heavy-duty rubbing compound, which is also available from your automotive paint supply store. Rub the rubbing compound in good, and what this does is it cleans all the road film, old wax, and grit out of the original paint and makes it smooth so you can blend the new paint into the old paint. Now you can do this by hand, or you can use a buffer, which is an electric buffer. It may take a little bit of rubbing. It is important that that area around where you're going to be applying the new paint is clean and smooth. Now when you're rubbing this out, try to rub out about 8-9 inches away from where you're going to be working. You want to make sure that the paint is clean away from your work area. After you apply the new paint and it sets up, then you'll rub the new paint and the old area with the rubbing compound, the heavy-duty rubbing compound, and you can use a paste or a liquid. It doesn't matter as long as it's a heavy-duty compound. By rubbing that out also, it gets the overspray of the primer off of the area of repair. And now it's ready to paint. Your repairs are all finished and you're ready to paint. Now what you want to do is take a clean dry rag and wipe the area all around to make sure you get the rubbing compound residue off of the body. It'll dry to a powder and it'll wipe off very easy. This way you make sure you have a nice, clean, smooth surface to paint to. Now paint will adhere, a lacquer paint, which is what we're going to use here, this is lacquer, will adhere to the unsanded painted area. As long as you rub it out and you get it back into original condition, the paint itself will burn into the old paint. Now you want to try to start and coat your wheel wells first. Do your outside repair work last, your outside paint work. Now this is lacquer paint, so it dries fairly quick. You don't have to worry too much about running it. What I've done is I've lowered my air pressure and my paint to the cup down to give it the same effect as if you were spraying it out of a spray can. And as you can see, I can pretty much keep going over my primered areas. And you want to cover the primered area, being that we used a gray primer on this and this is a light blue paint. The paint will cover in 2 coats, 3 coats tops. After you get your primer covered, then you want to put 1 or 2 good wet coats of paint on after the primer is covered. Now lacquer paint is used basically for touch-ups, for spotting in, because it will blend into the original paint after it's buffed and look fairly nice. As you can see there, that front of the quarter panel covered in about 3 coats. You can't see the primer anymore. So while I'm spraying the door jamb, the quarter panel has a chance to set up and dry. Lacquer paint will dry to where you can touch it in 15 minutes, but you can't buff it for at least 8 hours. When you're spraying your paint, you'll want to spray in an even pattern. Keep your paint can moving or your spray gun moving. Don't stay in one place too long because you will run the paint. You want to use even strokes and an even pattern. And there you have it. You've repaired your surface rust, you've primed, you've finished sanded, and your car is painted. After that dries, that can be unmasked. Let it set for about 8 hours, and you can hand buff the area that you painted. It will be shiny and smooth and match the original manufacturer's paint job. No more rust. Now in this segment here, this is enamel paint, acrylic enamel paint. This panel was previously repaired and is all finished sanded. Now this panel has been completely sanded because it is a whole panel that is being painted. Now with this here, you have to put this on in coats, and you want to make sure you spray it on even, just like the lacquer, except you won't be able to build this paint like you did the other paint. This is acrylic enamel paint. Now that is the first coat. Now that paint will have to dry for approximately 20 minutes before you can put the second coat of paint on. And as you can still see the primer through the first coat of the paint. The object is to cover the primer and then put one more good coat of paint on it, and then it's through. Now it's been about 20 minutes. This is dried. As you can see, the gloss died down. And this is the second coat of paint, which on this should pretty much cover the primered area. You want to keep the gun the same distance away from all the panels. Don't stay in one place too long. You want to keep your spray gun moving at all times. Now as you can see, the primer is pretty much basically covered there. We'll let this set 20 minutes. And we'll be back. Now this is the last coat. And notice how the area around the paint area is masked off. It's good to have at least 24 to 36 inches of paper around the area you are spraying, because this has a lot of overspray that will get all over the rest of your car. Always try to make sure you covered up as much as the car as you deem necessary to eliminate the overspray. Now that panel is finished. Shortly you'll see that unmasked and reassembled. And now you're ready to do the finish work on the trunk lid. Now this is the 320 sandpaper once again, and all you're doing is smoothing out the primer. The masking paper has been removed because this is going to be a blendable touch-up repair. Now you want to make sure you sand this long enough so that it's smooth. You don't see any imperfections in the primer itself or ripples. And after you've sanded that, you want to blow the area off. You want to clean the area. Get all the dust and sanding dust off of the surface. You can use a rag or your hand to wipe this while you're going. Make sure it's nice and clean. And now, like we did previously, you want to use the heavy-duty rubbing compound. You want to rub around the area you're going to touch up. Wipe the area down so it's good and dry and free of all dust and lint. Now, as you'll see, as we apply the color, you want to use even strokes. And I've tried to use the spray gun the same way as if it was a spray can of touch-up paint that you buy at the auto parts store. And this again is lacquer. Now, lacquer is a much faster drying paint than enamel. Therefore, I'm able to pretty much coat this without worrying about having any runs. Now when you're spraying, you want to make sure that your paint has a uniform look to it. Now after this is dry, you can hand buff it with rubbing compound and it will look like new. And there's the finished product. What started out as a ugly rusty trunk lid has now been repaired, repainted, and has added life and value to your car at a fraction of the cost of what it would cost you to have this done professionally. Now you can do the repair work and take it to your local body shop and have them do the paint work if you don't have an air compressor or spray gun available. And then this is the enamel paint after it's dried. Now enamel paint takes 12 hours to 24 hours to cure good. But this doesn't need any rubbing or sanding or anything. It's finished. Once you spray enamel paint, you are done. It's not like lacquer. Lacquer has to be hand rubbed or buffed with the rubbing compound. You can see it is shiny now. It's done. That needs no further work.
Well, there you have it. Basic body repair and painting in a nutshell. With a little practice and a little patience, you should be able to make your car or truck look like new again with the information that's contained on this tape.